We all know how the euro crisis began, with Greece and lies about ICT public deficit. Then over the next 2.5 years, the drama expanded to include Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and Spain. Now threatens the Spanish banking system to collapse and take the euro with it. Purpose causing what is really the euro crisis? Is it just a problem of sovereign debt and speculative attacks fed by the bond markets convinced KLE euro is not defended by credible financial institutions and power the way the US dollar is? Or are factoring other at work here, in particular cultural differences and globalization? Let's take them in turn. 1. Financial factors. On June 2, 2012, Soros, in a memorable and much discussed speech in Trento, Italy, made the point that HAS Angela Merkel is responsible for the way the crisis unfolded. She put a stop to Germany in icts' traditional role as the engine of a federated Europe. How did she do this? It seems that partner after the fall of Lehman Brothers in 2008 she declared that the virtual guarantee extended to financial institutions. Other shoulds come from each country acting separately, not by Europe acting jointly. Italics added, bizarre as it may seem, if you read Soros' speech as presented now on his website you will not find this particular reference to Ms. Merkel's declaration, undoubtedly taken down under diplomatic pressure. Mr. Soros may have cleaned up his speech to please the Germans. The fact remains that goal if Ms. Merkel and Germany immediately all had moved to quell the speculative attacks on Greece, we would not have a euro crisis now. Mr. Soros made significant further top 2 points. We have just 3 months to stem the euro crisis before it destroys the European Union and only the Germans can do it. This 3 months window is a consequence of the next government election in Greece, June 17. May 1. Expect the Greeks to be ready to accept the agreement bailout goal unable to meet the conditions. So the crisis will come to a climax in the fall just when the German economy will be weakening. Export markets have iced major slowdown. Under the circumstances, Chancellor Merkel will find it even more difficulty than today to persuade the German public to accept any additional European responsibilities. How did we get into this situation? Because the Maastricht Treaty created a common currency. Without prior political union, it took a step that was too big to be sustainable. As long the favorable economic winds were, the perceived instability was not. The common currency threw together countries at very different levels of development. For Germany, i.e. the center that includes other northern European countries like Finland or the Netherlands, the euro was an opportunity to expand exports. The euro was cheaper than the national currencies had been, and all the necessary measures to improve competitiveness were taken, chief among increases restraint on salary. For southern European economies, i.e. the periphery, the euro became a source of cheap credit feeding a dangerous consumption and housing boom. Commercial banks, allowed to accumulate government bonds without having to set aside capital equity, gobbled up bonds of the weaker euro members to make an extra profit. When the 2008 Wall Street crash came, European governments engaged in massive deficit spending and the periphery found itself in the position of a third world country that has become heavily indebted in a currency that it does not control. Financial markets discovered that was no such government debt along sovereign banks loaded with Leap's thesis found themselves insolvent. Result, a Troidement interlinked banking and sovereign debt crisis. In the spring of 2012 the Bundesbank, with claims of some 660 billion euros against the central banks of the Eurozone periphery began to shed them off, in order to limit the losses it would sustain in case of a Eurozone breakup. Furthermore, it has always been against expanding the money supply gold adopting any financial fix, most is notably Eurobonds, even though they would be an instant solution. Why? Because since the Bundesbank is in the driver's seat, it would having find itself to guarantee M. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once the Bundesbank does it, all banks do it. They are reordering their exposure along national lines. The center is shedding bonds from the periphery and conversely there's a capital flight from the periphery countries' reviews towards the stronger euro. Towards Germany in primis, German bond yields careers are near zero. As a result, credit to enterprises, medium and small especially the ones that are a major source of employment, becomes less available and unemployment soars in the periphery. Hence a deeper crisis. A wider divergence entre Germany and the rest of the Eurozone. Moreover, an orderly breakup is not in the cards because the current reordering of euro financial exposure within national boundaries is not completed. It would take several years. Yet those who would suffer the most from the breakup would be themselves the Germans. They've benefited from the euro the most. So far, a cheap euro has been the source of Germany's success in exports, but a restoration of the Deutschmark would be very painful since it would be higher than the much-valued euro ever was. By end June, a European summit should come up with proposals to avoid a euro breakup. So far, it appears que la following financial measures are under debate: a form of European banking union, with as a first step perhaps a European bank deposit insurance scheme to stem capital flight, a functioning bailout fund, already approved, strengthening the European stability mechanism so that it is able of providing good sufficient financial backing to the Eurozone banking system, Eurozone-wide supervision and regulation. It is probable that Germany will do whatever is needed to preserve the euro but no more, allowing the internal divergences entre les centre and periphery to grow, thus preventing the European Union of ever achieving a federal union like the United States. What is needed is to convince the Germans to do more. For a real political change, Ms. Merkel will need to leave, and that will not happen before 2013. Only then, assuming and a more pro-Europe party emerges, Germany might be more amenable to sustain the euro and the euro solve management problems. Problem solved? Not if factoring some other negative are at work in Europe, in particular on the social/cultural front. Two cultural factors. Cultural differences could well be that will overturn the both forces. Some researchers and NYT columnist, most recently David Brooks, see his excellent article here, que la have argued European Union project makes no historical sense in the face of deep-set cultural differences. Brooks reminds us how the world, partner after the disasters of World War II, yearned for peace and harmony. It was in this favorable setting that multicultural and supranational entities like the United Nations were created, and with it all the international organisms still with us, chief among them, the World Bank and the IMF. Those were the years aussi of the birth of the European Union project that began with the establishment of the coal and steel community, an optimistic attempt by Germany and France to bridge differences and there never go to war against each other again. Now, the pendulum swung has reviews the other way. Cultural differences are increasing, not diminishing. There is a failure of convergence, not just countries entre goal aussi within countries. Consider the United States, a single country with a single currency, purpose out as Brooks points, has become the country more polarized, not less. The country has become more difficulty to govern, not less. This is why the 21st century will be, as he puts it, the segmentation century. With the rise of modern communication technologies and the internet, people's tastes have become more parochial, not less. Brooks argues convincingly que la failure of convergence is most striking in Europe. While a tiny sliver of European society, as he puts it, is becoming more transnational, only 2% of Europeans live in a different European nation than their country of citizenship. Habits, values and opinions differ from country to country. For example, 40% of Danes believe that work is a very significant share of their lives, compared with roughly 65% of the French. Ceylon Pew Research surveys, 73% of Germans think that economic terms are good right now. In France, 19% think that, and only 6% in Spain. Europe means clustering different things to different people. There is an understanding not even that Germans are closer to Greeks than they are to Chinese or Iranians. Add to KLE fact that there's been a resurgence of local regionalism, the Basques in Spain, the Flemish Walloon Rift in Belgium, the Lombards Northern League in Italy, etc. Not to mention the remarkable success of nationalistic, anti-immigrant party like Marine Le Pen's Front National in France, a real throwback to 19th century chauvinism. In this environment, it should come as no surprise que la European Union project has a hard time surviving. To make matters worse, there is reviews another negative factor at work here, the one qui l'autre underlies 2, globalization. 3. The impact of globalization over the past decade. Globalization has progressively impacted developed countries, the Eurozone, and in particular, in the following ways. Progressively, governments are losing control over tax revenues there. It becomes easier ever for big, global corporations and the ultra-rich to escape taxation. To illustrate, 2 examples will suffice. The Greek shipping industry is not taxed by the government, the theory being white if that were taxed shipping magnates, they'd move elsewhere, hence it's useless to even attempt to tax them. General Electric, the American corporate giant, has over 1,000 staff dedicated to exploiting tax loopholes, with the result that GE country one of the lowest corporate taxes in America. Last year, despite $14.2 billion in worldwide profits, including more than $5 trillion from U.S. operations, GE about did not owe the U.S. government any taxes in 2010. Competitiveness in the industrial sector is threatened this by emerging economies, the BRICS, and is outsourcing, eliminating jobs, particularly in manufacturing, causing increasing unemployment. The IT sector and advanced other such green energy technologies have so far not created enough jobs to cover the losses in industry. As a result, unemployment is not only sticky, it has grown wide, especially for new entrants in the labor market, in particular the young. Conclusion: Quo vadis Europe reform, can you? This is the general backdrop against the Euro. Key drama is unfolding: a financial mess, cultural diversity, and globalization. Which means clustering, that even if a financial fix is found to shore up the euro, the long-term downward economic trends due to globalization will continue as Eurozone governments find it hard to raise adequate revenues, as European industry finds it hard to compete with cheap imports produced in the BRICS, as the loss of jobs in manufacturing is not compensated by gains in other newer sectors. Over time, this means clustering the Eurozone as a whole is growing poorer, even if the Germans still feel rich and less reliable, obviously. Afford to icts expensive welfare system. Austerity is the catchword. Cuts into pensions and health care benefits appear inevitable. The alternative is to make the management of the welfare system more efficient. Implies that goal: reforming the state bureaucracy, cutting out red tape and duplicative unnecessary jobs, streamlining management processes, suppressing clientelism, etc. This particular concerns in the euro periphery, even though the center is not immune to the need for administrative reform. Even Europeans are able of reform? The Germans demand it. Aim: the cultural differences will stop reform in ICT tracks? Very possibly. People in the periphery are already rebelling against austerity. From there it's a small step intended to rebel against any kind of reform, however much needed. The only way to move forward would be to believe in something bigger once again, the fantastic project of the European Union, as Mr. Soros calls it. You need dreams to overcome the grim reality of retrenchment, chauvinistic contents, each country behind its own borders. Is the European dream dead? Can it be revived? Surely what is lacking in Europe is a European leader with a vision. Often Ms. Merkel talks about wanting more Europe. She does not aim to be aware SCCM that time has run out on her. The euro financial mess has to be fixed now and cannot wait the decades necessary to overcome cultural differences and achieve reform, step by step, the way Ms. Merkel wants to do it. What is needed is a European leader with the fortitude to push for European federation. Now, someone charismatic. Can Mr. Hollande, the new French president, do it? Can he be regarded charismatic? I doubt it. Certainly his heart is in the right spot. He talks about the need for growth, and that is a step in the right direction. Purpose: it does not address the fundamental issue. Key is a lack of European cooperation. Europeans need to understand that they are in this together because they've adopted a single currency. They now need to take that final step and the full process to sustain the euro. If not, the euro will drop dead, and Europe with it. The tsunami will be enormous. The shock waves will hit the American continent as well as the BRICS. It is in everyone's interest to see Europe Euro ICT solve problem.